Thanks everyone. We're going to start in a short time. This session is about HIV advocacy. I think it's very important because we all have a voice. But I would like to start with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. As an immigrant and with an international laboratory environment, we are committed to learning about Indigenous people's culture and history, their suffering, and what are the frameworks proposal for healing and confronting oppression. It is our responsibility and commitment to study and educate ourselves to avoid stigmatization and perpetuating discrimination or damage. Okay, so here is the outline that I prepared for today. Some history of HIV and AIDS activism. What is advocacy? Why people advocate? Ways of advocacy, communicating message powerfully, and additional resources. We printed for you a great material produced by Results Canada. They are a very powerful organization of activists and people who constantly advocate to decrease poverty, to have a better education, and to fight, for example, some infectious diseases such as tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV. So I want to start, sorry, give me 1 sec, sorry. I want to start sharing, Mari, can you see the screen? Okay. To share this video. Okay. Every time that we try to have something, or it fails, give me 1 second.
Pissed to clear out stuff poop fast. Did you know the diarrhea did not have a name?
The lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
But it quickly developed a reputation.
And the deaths kept coming and coming.
The fear was palpable.
I was terrified of passing on HIV to someone else.
But in the years that followed,
It was pretty miraculous for me.
so was the break.
Because of them, I live a healthy and happy life.
He sat down with 4 gay men from 4 different generations, all living with HIV. The oldest is Jesse Mylan, who's still haunted by the beginning of the epidemic.
People who, because they had been diagnosed, suddenly disappeared. And we all knew what that silence meant.
Jesse was diagnosed in the 80s after losing his partner, George, and so many others.
It was hard. It's clear.
At the time, many leaders were accused of ignoring the crisis because it was deemed a gay disease. President Reagan didn't give his first major speech on AIDS until 1987, 6 years after the first diagnosed case.
We must have a definition of AIDS.
For Dr. Anthony Fauci, the epidemic was a turning point. In 1984, he became the nation's top infectious disease expert, the same job he holds today.
When there is resistance, was it hard to get the resources you needed?
Well, in the beginning, it was. I mean, we were trying to convince people that this was not something that was going to go away. This is something that was going to get worse and worse.
To raise awareness, the AIDS memorial quilt was unveiled on the National Mall. Organizers read the names of those who died. Some shared their stories publicly, including actor Rock Hudson, teen Ryan White, who tested positive after a blood transfusion, real-world star Pedro Zamora, basketball legend Magic Johnson. In 1995, a combo therapy known as the AIDS cocktail was ushered in, followed by even better medications, offering hope. But there was no cure for the stigma.
Right now, there are millions of people with HIV suffering from social rejection because they and other people believe that they're infectious and they're not.
Diagnosed in 2003, Bruce Richmond says he was terrified of giving HIV to someone else.
So I didn't love. I isolated myself. I was depressed. And times I was suicidal.
But then he learned medication could reduce his viral load to undetectable levels, meaning he couldn't transmit the virus. So Bruce started an advocacy group and coined the phrase U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable, message endorsed by the CDC.
It gave me hope. It meant that I could be intimate. People with HIV can live healthy lives and not pass on the virus to anyone. That's a revolution.
Today, about 38,000 Americans are still diagnosed each year. DeAndre Moore was 19. Remember staring at a window covered in butterfly stickers.
In that moment, all I could think was, Tiana, I could be one of those butterflies and just fly away from here, then everything's gonna be okay.
Ray of Darazi had a similar reaction. He was 27.
So I knew next to nothing about what it meant to be diagnosed with HIV. It's a steep learning curve.
And what did you learn?
Well, I learned that I'm not gonna die. I'm alive and well.
You think back to that moment with the butterfly, what would you tell yourself in that moment?
You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be just as beautiful.
Today, all four of these men are undetectable. And all are advocates, sharing their stories to educate the public and fight the stigma.
It's taken us 30 years of the AIDS crisis to teach the whole world that our lives and our loves are equal to everyone else.
It blows my mind just how far we've come. And
It is possible now.
my mind was of what isn't possible. That's the answer.
Another key breakthrough in recent years, PrEP. It's a daily pill that people who are HIV negative can take to prevent getting the disease. As for an HIV/AIDS vaccine, well, that did not happen yet, but Dr. Fauci tells me he is cautiously optimistic that someday we will have a vaccine that is successful. 26-year-old DeAndre Moore, who you saw there, hopes that he is someday going to be part of an AIDS-free generation. And we want to give a big thank you to 3 organizations that helped us with that story there: the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, AIDS United, and the Prevention Access Campaign.
It's incredible to see how far we've come in those decades. We all remember those scenes in the 80s, but there still is a stigma. Isn't that what you learned?
Yeah, there is, and it's actually kind of amazing, especially with young people, which is surprising. So a recent survey of HIV negative millennials found that nearly a third of them said they avoid hugging, talking to, or even being friends with someone with HIV. People living with HIV often report being hesitant still to openly share their status because they fear losing friends or family, or they even fear abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental.
Reminds us of Billy Porter just last week, who just announced it.
Big sign of bravery, even now, it's needed now, just more than before.
And he waited 14 years, waited to tell his mother, so that stigma is still there.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Again, we will be celebrating Pride all month across all 4 hours of today. Our streaming.
Okay, this is the first one. What I wanted to mention is to share with you some real stories, which some of you have experienced by yourselves, but also to acknowledge that thanks to activists is that many people around the world can have access to treatment, push governments to develop research strategies, push other organizations to support people living with HIV. There is another one that I wanted to share. The link didn't work, so I have to play it like this.
I'm Eric Sawyer. I'm one of the founders
Oh,
of Health Gap, and I now work for the New York office of UNAIDS. I think activism has been
sorry. The previous one, you could see it.
I'm Eric Sawyer. I'm one of the founders of ACT UP New York, of Housing Works, and of Health Gap, and I now work for the New York office of UNAIDS. I think activism has been incredibly important to the HIV response. In the beginning of the epidemic, we didn't know how HIV was transmitted. There were no cures for HIV. There were no effective treatments. There were no treatments for the opportunistic infections that were killing people in horrible ways in a matter of a year or two. So activists took to the streets because the government wasn't being responsive. Pharmaceutical industry was not being responsive. The media or the public in general wasn't being responsive until we took to the streets. We had no social protections like access to Medicare or Medicaid or housing allowances or food stamps or income maintenance or welfare. And we had no social protections. There were no legal protections. And so we fought to get access to that safety net. We fought for inclusion in the American with Disabilities Act. We fought for anti-discrimination legislation so that people couldn't be fired from their jobs, so health insurance couldn't be denied them, so that health care couldn't be denied them, so that people couldn't be evicted. And I don't think any of that would have happened without activism. We also fought to change the drug approval process, shortening it to allow drugs in their body to help them survive this epidemic. That's a benefit that everyone enjoys. I think that lots of other illnesses, first it was breast cancer and now autism and other non-communicable diseases, have learned a lot from activism and HIV and are modeling their response a lot after the HIV response. Putting patients first, a patient-centered approach to the epidemic began with the AIDS response, and it's the correct response. I'm really grateful for institutions like San Francisco General and researchers like Paul Boverding and in New York, Joe Sonovan, who took it upon themselves to do research on their own patients, to share information. It's because of their efforts that we learned how to treat and manage opportunistic infections, and many of us wouldn't be alive today without that important research. And I'm really grateful as a person living with HIV for that.
Okay, so I wanted to show you these two videos to acknowledge the power of activism. So each one of you can make changes, bigger, smaller, but make changes within your community. So this is a wonderful website where I took the materials that I printed for you to learn about advocacy. This is Results Canada. They have several training tools about how to engage with your member of parliament, get published in the media, speak out on social media, and how to volunteer successfully. And for each one, for these, we printed some of them, not all of them, but there are templates that you can use to reach out to your member of parliament. You can prepare a letter, or you can promote an initiative in social media. So I found it really, really good. So when we talk about what is advocacy, so that is the first question. So advocacy is support from members of the public to help achieve a goal or aim, speaking out on behalf of others. But one of the main points of advocacy is that we want to influence decision makers, those politicians, those people in high-level positions that can change life of people. Advocacy is championing an issue, drawing attention to it, and get it on the agenda. But one of the key important messages is that advocacy seeks to change And this is extremely important, and for that reason, we included in the Manitoba Champions, because each one of you can become an active advocate for any cause that you consider must be addressed. It is a process, so it means that it's not only one activity. It requires discipline, it requires a constant presence and support, and that you keep moving forward. It is about motivating and mobilizing the community. So sometimes, if you think about this environmental movement that Greta Thunberg started, you see the picture of her sitting alone somewhere in a Nordic country. And then more people start joining, and currently she is a world-renowned advocate to improve environment. So don't feel afraid to speak out outside and start your initiative. So why people advocate? There are several reasons. One of the most important is to influence policy changes. Another very important is to change budget. So when we have an issue and we want to increase funding for a specific problem within the government budget. To give a concrete example here in Manitoba, many groups, many organizations across the province, institutions, have been advocating to improve the budget, to increase the budget, to reach out to people who are not connected to care, to reach out to people who face barriers to access HIV care and substance use. So this is a part of the advocacy that several groups and people have been doing in Manitoba. Concretely, in HIV, advocacy allows to improve or promote to improve access to HIV prevention, as the video shows, with PrEP, testing, treatment, access to care. It also currently across the country and the world to improve the social and structural determinants that many people living with HIV are experiencing. So, for example, how to have a transitional housing for people who are experiencing houselessness, or how to have more social support services, access to food, access to safe shelters for the person and their loved ones. Also, people advocate to implement an existing policy or a successful program. So sometimes advocacy groups try to push the governments to implement successful experiences. One of the key important things is that advocacy seeks to ensure that all people in society are able to have their voice heard on issues that are important to them, protect and promote their rights, have their views and wishes genuinely considered when decisions are being made by their lives. And advocacy is a process of supporting and enabling people. So one of the key important things is to support people to express their views, their thoughts and concerns, access to information, advice and guidance, and explore choices and options for service and care. So in this case, what people who advocate look for is for empowering communities, speaking up on behalf of people that cannot speak by themselves, safeguarding communities, enabling communities, and supporting communities and people who are impacted by any problem that they are facing. So the first message is speak out. So all of you might be familiar or not with human rights movements, or how women were able to vote around the world, or the abolition of slavery. So all of those are examples of how advocacy movements help to promote and implement human rights for votes for women. So there are plenty of examples of how of achievements in society brought by people who stood up and speak out spoke out when they think something was wrong. One important thing is when we see injustice in the world, they sometimes organize, people get together and speak out against what's wrong and try to get it changed. This is called campaigning. So when we get together and how we are going to campaign for an initiative, for an idea that we have. So can you think of a campaign that you have heard about either where you live or in another country that you heard of?
Would WHO be one of them?
Whatever initiative that you think.
World Health Organization?
What is you?
I think so, not it.
For example, one of the most important campaigns is Every Child Matters. So there are people that get together and have this slogan, and the slogan is just for all of us to remember the atrocities of residential schools, for example. So this is a wonderful example of activism. And there are many others that you can think about. So why bother campaigning? Because it works, right? Federal, provincial, and local leaders cannot fail to hear what people are saying. Think of a campaign that you've heard of that has made a difference. So why did it work? Because if you were being treated unfairly in some way, you'd want someone to stand up for you. Wouldn't you do it? One thing that is important is that you consider that your voice and your opinions are important and you can make them heard. So this is something that is very, very important. Yes.
I was providing some more examples. Student debt forgiveness, clean drinking water for all. Over something.
Thank you, Alina, for those wonderful examples. Clean water, for example, is a great campaign.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Mothers against
Drunk driving.
drunk driver. So
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, for example.
There's campaign to make abortion a protected right.
For example, sexual reproductive health. All of us have been seeing in the news all some groups that want to ban the abortion rights for women.
There's also like protect trans kids.
Protect trans kids. So all of those are wonderful examples, and thank you so much everyone for sharing those incredible examples. Are very powerful, and they started with people like us. They are not super famous actors. They started with people that felt that their rights were violated or that the governments are not protecting them. So it's just how to gather together, how to prepare the message, how to reach out the influencers, the policymakers, and to voice your message. So what kind of things might be part of a campaign? So the key is that it needs to be organized and have a clear goal. So the most common sorts of campaign are a video, a demonstration or a march, writing letters to influential people. So I print for you some examples of how to write a letter to the member of parliament with a concrete issue that you have or that you would like that the government address. Petitions delivered to prominent people, lobbying politicians, and wearing a color armband, or all of you have seen that in the World AIDS Day, we usually use the red ribbon. So the Red Ribbon Project was created in 1991, and it was to create awareness around the world about HIV, and that people living with HIV and diagnosed with HIV matters, and to protect their rights and their well-being. So there's several ways of how to do a campaign. There are events, there are messages on social media, etc. But the key important thing is that should be organized and should have a goal. So this is an advocacy strategy roadmap. So in this case, there are several steps of how we should promote or create an advocacy strategy. So the first step is to have an advocacy issue. So what is the problem, right? Root causes and identifying your evidence base. So we need to provide policymakers with the evidence. So for example, in this case, in Manitoba, one of the key messages from the last report was that 48% of females and around 30% of males who were newly diagnosed with HIV were experiencing houselessness. So one of the problems is houselessness among people newly diagnosed with HIV. So that might be a reason to promote a campaign for transitional housing, right? So one of the things that you can think of is define a current objective or focus of area of your program. You need to gather evidence, so something that supports that your facts are problem. So I just provided 48% and 30%. It can be improved with advocacy. So what you select, you need to address to advocacy movements and that you can achieve within 3 to 5 years and should be very specific and clear. So some questions when you are thinking about advocacy issues. Can a policy change or implementation of an existing policy help improve that root cause? Does your organization have programmatic experience with this root cause? Do you have any evidence that this is a root cause? Then you need to set your goals and objectives. So these goals, you need to have to be clear, that should be specific, clear, should be specific, measurable, should be achievable, should be relevant, and should be time-based. So when you think about the goals, you need to think about the who, the what, the how, and the when. So the who is the decision making that you want to reach out. The what is what you want to change. The how is the specific action you are proposing the decision making can take to accomplish the change. And the when is a time frame for the action to occur. So once they implement that strategy, when do you expect to see outcomes? The other point is decision makers and influencers. So you need to define, after you have the goals and objectives, you need to define who you are going to reach out. So you can reach out to decision makers or you can reach out to influencers. So decision makers are people with the formal power, for example, member of parliament or authority to take the desired policy action and or their key advisors of the staff. Influencers are people or groups who can have a compelling force on the actions, opinions, or behaviors of decision makers. Then you need to think about advocacy, strengths, limitations, and partnerships. Sorry, you need to think about the opposition and obstacles. So in opposition are a group of adversaries or competitors, especially a rival political party. And an obstacle is something that blocks one's way or prevents or hinders progress. Then you move to the advocacy strengths, limitations, and partnerships. You need to prepare approaches and activities of what you are going to develop with this advocacy movement initiative. Then crafting advocacy messages, how you are going to deliver using social media. So we printed some examples for you of how to use effectively social media, which kind of social media, some tips if you are using, for example, Twitter. And finally, you need to measure advocacy progress and adaptive management. So all initiatives must be measured with concrete outcomes. And those outcomes can be small changes. It can be something simple, change in language. So one example that I remember with change in language is indigenous groups have been advocating for not calling Aboriginal, so that word is not anymore welcome, and called indigenous peoples, for example. So those are small changes that advocacy groups have been advocating for. The other component is how we communicate a message powerful. So this website propose or share with all of us 2 key strategies to communicate a message in a powerful way. No matter if you are speaking with a decision maker or the media, if you are writing a letter to the member of parliament, or even if you are convincing a friend to join your initiative. So number 1, your message must be structured, must be persuasive, and must invite to make a call to action. And the second point is you must speak from the heart and tell a story that is compelling in order to motivate others. So one of the key components that people who are doing advocacy is how to develop storytelling skills. Because when you share your story, thanks, and you are very brave to share your personal story. But in addition, people that are listening to you are experiencing or are realizing that there are other people that may face similar feelings or similar thoughts. So when you're communicating the message, in particular, for example, for members of parliament, or a decision maker, or media, or even a friend, you may have only 1 to 2 minutes. So you need to get to the point, otherwise you lose the attention of the person. So there is an anagram called EPIC. So EPIC means E, the engage, P, the problem, I, inform, and C, from call to action. So every letter that you write, and there is an example in the documents about how to draft a letter with that. So you can see it on the materials that we printed for you. So you can see that there is an example in one of the documents. There are 2. One that is how to write to your member of parliament, and the other one is suggested layout for member of parliament letter of email. So it gives you an idea of this epic. To start with a very attractive line. So start with a very, people remember your first sentence and your last sentence. For this reason, it's very important to take into account the engage. The problem must be very short, specific, concrete, and most important, ideally with numbers, right? And what is your proposal? Is the informed and call to action. So what is the specific thing that you are requesting from that member of parliament, and how you are going to follow up those kind of things. This is an advice for today. Yes.
Frida just shared this comment. The world we live is so corrupted. Well, if I was government, I would make us all extinct to a certain way.
Frida. Thank you, Frida, for sharing that. So an advice for today's activist from Sarah Schulman. She is the co-director of ACT UP. ACT UP is an international organization that has several branches around the world. They started one of the strongest HIV groups around the world. They were the ones that have been constantly advocating since the 90s for access to treatment, for access to healthcare, for access to testing. Yes.
Who are they actually affiliated with though? Like, are
In
they
Canada.
government or what?
Federal.
Because like, just recently, we went on a meeting with them. And what is it called again? Some kind of like, it had some kind of a government initial.
Right, you talking about UNDRIP?
Huh?
UNDRIP?
That, what did you just say again?
Act up.
Act up, yeah, cause like, we were having a hard time getting paid for the honorarium for attending their meeting. And like, we were with Johnny when we went to their meeting. And now we have to wait like another, well, Wayne and I have to wait another 5 more weeks, but we were wondering why they were like on strike and stuff like that, and why people weren't being paid and stuff like that.
Are they from, ACT-UP, what's their affiliation in Manitoba or in?
They are non-governmental organizations. So they are NGOs. These groups in particular.
Are they considered ACO, like an AIDS service organization, ASO?
I don't
I
know.
can read you what it says on their website. It says,
Because
"Founded
you know
in March
what?
1987, a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis." So it's just individual.
It's individuals.
Oh,
So
okay.
there are a group of
Like an activist group, think of it as a grassroots, it seemed like that's where it started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I will repeat the question of Rebecca.
I wonder how come they have to, why do they make their, like, when they call up for questionnaires and stuff like that, they have to do everything precisely by the book, because like, when they were when Johnny was trying to say, well, why don't you just, reimburse us for paying the ones that attended the meeting? And they said, no, we have to get like each and everyone's information. And it kind of sounded like they were trying to figure out who was getting honorariums from where, kind of thing.
Thank you. So they were asking who, if these organizations are part of the government. The answer is no. Those are independent organizations. So those are created by people like you and me that want to advocate for a change. So that is the concrete answer. How they manage, they receive funding from governments and from other philanthropic organizations. So the industry donates money to NGOs or activists. They receive money from several sources. So that is how they fund their own activism. And part of the activism is to advocate for resources, to pay people. Many people volunteer their time. So they go to march, they donate their time and their knowledge to these groups. So this is how more or less many groups start. People who want to make a change and they donate their time. Then they gather together, they structure
Beds
on the
or
process.
something like that.
Sorry?
Beds.
Yeah, like how are you
Yeah.
supposed to like do activism when you have like a federal government that's against like, say like safe consumption sites, like especially in Manitoba, we're so behind on everything because we're federal government. So how are you supposed to have precise and like progressive activism when your federal government pushes back on so much of the social aspects you're trying to bring forth in your activism?
Perfect. Thank you, Jacqueline. So Jacqueline is asking why the federal government push back the harm reduction strategies. Actually, it's not the federal government, it's the provincial
Oh,
government.
provincial, I mean, sorry.
No, no problem. So because unfortunately, Canada is federal, so it means that each province is autonomous. So, for example, the initiative of harm reduction that Sunshine House has is funded through the federal government. But you have noticed how many barriers many groups have faced with the provincial government. So basically is number one, each person has to vote, is where we decide who is our government. So this is part of the movement of each vote matters. So the first invitation is when we have politicians that we feel that they fail to us, the first thing is we need to vote. The second thing is to promote together and to push again. So you see how many groups in Manitoba try to speak out loud. They gather together, they push the message, they provide evidence that this is more personal views and moral views rather than scientific evidence that have proven that this works. Nadia?
So how do you actually prove that you actually provide or think positive of something you're gonna actually vote for? So how are they gonna prove that to me that they're gonna keep my voice like high up there instead of just low? So how are they gonna stand up for me? Like how am I gonna ask you that? Like how do I know?
Okay, when you say how they, do you mean politicians?
Yeah, anybody. Like if I vote, like how I'm gonna know they're gonna use my voice, my opinion. And then say if our group of sisters of fire voted, how are we gonna know that this actually gonna go up there?
That is a wonderful question. The first thing we need to do the task of reading the proposal of each candidate. So that is on us to read what are their proposals. If their proposals align with what we think, that is on that side. On the other side, previously, when we started, one of the things that we showed is the importance to write to the member of parliament. The member of parliament, I brought an example, are very easy to reach out. So politicians listen to people. So reach out to the member of parliament, make them aware of the needs that you have. And in this, but you need to prepare that meeting. So it needs to be concrete, specific, short, with a very concrete message, where you provide the member of parliament with a proposal of what you would like to achieve. And the more people request meetings, send letters, promote in social media, and advocate, at some point they have to meet. So part of our task is to reach out to people and express our voices. The other is, for example, that you gather together and start an advocacy initiative to promote whatever you consider you should promote. But the important thing is, in all of this talk, one of the things is you can make a change. You just need to believe in yourself. You need to gather together, design a message, and this is a process. So it requires that from time to time, you continue with the message and advocate with several, whoever, decision makers or etc. So an advice for today's activists from Sarah Schulman, the co-director of ACT UP Oral History Project, are basically three things. To design your solution, become the expert on your issue, so you need to research some information, and build campaigns around things that are reasonable, winnable, and doable, right? So, for example, currently in Manitoba, there are several groups that are advocating for safe injection sites. That is doable, that is achievable. There are initiatives that are working on that and generating evidence how many of deaths due to overdoses they have prevented thanks to those initiatives. So they are generating the evidence to convince the government to implement those acts. But there are other initiatives in the province. So how to develop peer navigators and peer support, how to reach people who are not linked to care and find people where people are at. So how we decrease barriers to access healthcare. So those are current initiatives that are currently in the province. But my point is, you don't need to be a superstar. You just need to focus your idea, clarify what you want, which issue you want to address, gather together, and come up with a proposal. These are the last slides are just links. We're gonna share with you all of these presentations. So number one, if you want to learn more about HIV and AIDS activism in Canada, there are these two great links that shows the history, the HIV activism. This is a beautiful timeline that shows the timeline. This is an incredible website for everyone. It is called HIV Legal Network.ca. It's amazing. They have several initiatives, but one of the most important is decriminalize HIV. So they are the group across Canada that are leading decriminalization of HIV. I strongly encourage everyone to look.
Are they in here too?
This is Results Canada, but this presentation we will send you by email.
Okay.
So it's there. HIV Legal Network provides incredible resources, training. So you can reach out to them and ask how you can support those. Getting involved, finding services. These are two slides with all the incredible organizations in Canada that are working in this field. So you can reach out to them. And one of them, Answer Coast. So, but there are many others. Like there are extensive examples of organizations that promote or advocate. So, for example, the Manitoba HIV program and Answer Coast fought for having PrEP available in the province. Manitoba was the last province in Canada to have a PrEP available. PrEP was approved in 2011. PrEP is to prevent HIV acquisition. It was approved in 2011. The province of Manitoba approved it just a couple of years ago. So this is part of what advocacy groups do. Advocate for this kind of making treatment accessible, decreasing healthcare barriers. So it's in your hands, whatever you want to do. Is there any question?
I know, I was asking the girls before, because we met with some ladies and there was some certain stuff that we're lacking for ourselves, like the education on what would you call it to run your own group without having to be a partner with anybody.
Or just like organizing. Huh? Organizing?
Yeah, like to have our own organized. Because if we, say if Sisters of Fire wasn't connected with Gannigan and it was just us, how would we, say if they gave us money, how would we bank our own money and how would we take care of stuff like that? Like, what kind of education would we have to go into to learn about that?
Mm-hmm. You touch a very important point, and it's the partnerships. So how we partner with other organizations, with other groups, because definitely partnership is a win-win. But it must have a clear expectations, shared power, so that you don't feel that they are telling me what to do or vice versa. etc. So there are several strategies, but definitely partner with other organizations and other groups and expand the network and collaborations is very powerful. So you have been done it, participating here, so networking with other people, attending to conference, attending to other projects and research groups.
I believe what Rebecca's talking about is how would somebody, if they're doing independent advocacy on their own, how would they branch and network themselves so that they can get funding for education, so that they can do proposal writing and to know some board dynamics so that they can like function as an independent nonprofit.
Thank you for that clarification, Jackie.
Am I right?
Yeah. There's, like, I have a lot of experience in that personally, but there is like organizer training. You can get, like, I got it because I was part of the animal rights movement, so I learned that, like, how to set up a bank account, how to write proposals, how to apply for funding. But there are resources like available for, it's called organizer training. So I can see if I can find some things online, and there might be like some courses or workshops that you can take. Yeah.
Preferably for free or like.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, I can see what's available out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Is there any other questions?
Selena says, community funding strategies is a great question.
Yeah. Something very important is that you have, there are extensive opportunities to apply for grants or community proposals that people don't know about them. So this is very important. Tons.
I just seen one with 9 circles and
Collective Impact Network.
Huh?
If there's one with Collective Impact Network.
yeah,
That's
that's
if you do it-
$3,000.
Yeah, if you do a testing event.
yeah, that's an I seen that one on the 9 circles in there.
Exactly. So the main message is you can be a game changer in your community. You just need to clarify what is your goal, what do you want to do, gather together with, you don't need hundreds of people. You initially need a small group where you can develop the idea, write your proposal, and the last thing is you need to try. Like we all write proposals and many times we receive rejections, but don't get discouraged because of that. Just try, and one day you will get it, and it's a matter of just moving forward. Are there any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. I think that like in order to have your voice heard, it's like from little steps. So really putting yourself in the spotlight, going to conferences, doing abstracts, putting in proposals, and just keep on, being positive about your approaches. Then once your name is out there, you'll start getting involved and invited to more opportunities.
That is a great feedback. Thank you for sharing that. That is very important. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We are gonna pass the post test.